They said it was just a mall, but at night, it becomes something else. I thought this job would be easy. Just walk the empty halls, check a few cameras, make sure no one's hiding out where they shouldn't be. But then, I saw the rules. Not your usual safety protocols or emergency exits. No, these were different. They sounded like something out of a strange dream, rules that couldn't possibly apply to real life. They didn't warn about hazards or security concerns. They warned about things I'd never heard of, things that only happen when the lights go down and the mall settles into that heavy silence. Rule 1. Avoid the East Wing after 2 a.m. Rule 2. If you hear someone knocking on the security office door, do not answer. Rule 3. Stay away from mirrors after midnight. There were others too, each one specific and strange, more like superstitions than safety measures. They never explained what would happen if you didn't follow them. I asked, but the day guard just laughed and shook his head. Just follow the rules, that's all you need to know. And then he turned away, as if that was supposed to be enough. I thought maybe the rules were a joke, something left behind by a bored guard to freak out the newbies. But each night, as I walked the floors, there was this feeling like something was wrong. Not something you can put your finger on, just an unsettled air, a sense of waiting. I laughed it off at first, but as I did my rounds that night, there was this unease. The silence wasn't just empty, it felt dense, pressing against me. The lights would flicker here and there, and each time I passed the East Wing, I couldn't help but feel like something was watching from just beyond the shadows. Each time I walked past the East Wing or caught a reflection in the glass storefronts after midnight, that sense of unease would tighten, like a silent warning. I'd feel a shiver, like the building itself was watching. I'd seen plenty of night shifts before, but nothing ever felt quite like this place. The longer I stayed, the more it felt like the rules weren't just guidelines, they were barriers, boundaries keeping something in. Or maybe keeping me out. The mall during the day is one thing, crowded, busy, bright, filled with families, shoppers, the noise of life. But at night, it's a different place altogether. The lights are dimmed, the air gets colder, and the whole building feels hollow, like it's waiting. Each night, as I step into that silent darkness, it's as if the mall is holding its breath. You'd think after a while I'd get used to it, the silence and the stillness. But every night, as I walked the halls alone, it only felt stranger, colder. The air would press down on me, heavy and stifling, with nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights echoing in the background. It felt like the place had a presence, something hidden in the shadows, watching me as I passed. The East Wing was off limits after 2 a.m., and it seemed harmless enough. But every time I got close, it was as if the shadows in that hallway got darker, thicker somehow. There's a strange smell there too, a faint scent of mold and something rotten, drifting through the air like a ghost of something long forgotten. I kept my distance just like the rule said, but each time I passed it, I felt drawn in, like there was something pulling at me, urging me to step just a little closer, just to look. It was one of those long nights where time seemed to stretch, every minute passing like an hour. I'd walked the same halls so many times that they'd become almost familiar, but each round brought a new unease, a feeling that grew stronger every night. I'd been careful, following the rules to the letter. But that night, while I was doing my last round, I lost track of time. I was in the East Wing when I felt it, something almost breathing in the shadows. It was like a cold wave washing over me, a feeling that I shouldn't be there, that I wasn't alone. As I walked down that corridor, I noticed something strange. The lights weren't flickering, not exactly, but they felt dimmer, like they were being swallowed up by the dark. And there was a smell, faint at first, but it grew stronger the further I went. It was this damp, musty odor, mixed with something metallic like rusted metal left in the rain. I checked my watch, 2:07 a.m. I was supposed to be out of the East Wing by 2. I hadn't even noticed the time passing. It was as if I'd been pulled there, like something wanted me in that corridor past the cutoff. I started to turn back, to head to the main halls, but then I saw something. Just at the edge of my vision, a shadow moving at the end of the hallway. It wasn't a trick of the light, there was something there, something that moved. It wasn't just a shadow. I couldn't make out a face, or even tell if it had one. But there was this presence, like it was watching me. I could feel its gaze, cold, heavy and sharp. My skin prickled, and a shiver ran down my spine. I knew I had to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in that hallway with whatever it was. I finally managed to back away, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I made it to the security office, practically slammed the door shut behind me, and just stood there, trying to steady my breathing. But the moment I started to feel safe again, I heard it. A sound that made every hair on my neck stand up. A soft, rhythmic knock on the door. Just 3 knocks, quiet but deliberate. I stood there staring at the door, not daring to breathe. I'd heard knocks before, just faint taps I'd convinced myself were my imagination. But this was real. The knock was slow, steady, as if someone or something was waiting. It didn't stop. 3 knocks, a pause, and then another 3. My mind raced, wondering who or what could be out there. For a moment I thought it might be a prank, maybe someone messing with me. But deep down I knew it wasn't. The rule had been clear: do not answer if someone knocks on the security office door after hours. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to open it, to just look. But fear rooted me in place. The knocks kept coming. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in that silence with nothing but the knock. Knock, knock to keep me company. I felt like if I opened the door, something would be waiting on the other side, something that didn't belong. It felt wrong, like the knocking itself was calling to me, demanding that I break the rule. Finally, I turned away, hands shaking, refusing to look back at the door. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on anything else. But even as I tried to ignore it, the knocking, it wouldn't stop. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it went quiet. The silence was even worse than the knocking. It left me alone with my thoughts, with that lingering feeling of dread that crawled up my spine. I waited, barely daring to breathe, until I was sure, absolutely sure, that it was gone. I knew I'd been close, too close to breaking the rule, and whatever was on the other side of that door, I had a feeling it wouldn't have stopped if I'd let it in. That was the first time I really understood the importance of the rules. They weren't just guidelines, they were a warning, one that I couldn't afford to ignore. After that night, the rules no longer seemed strange. They were the only things keeping me safe. Each night I'd follow them carefully, keeping my distance from the East Wing at 2 a.m., ignoring every knock, avoiding mirrors after midnight. But sometimes, no matter how hard I tried, it felt like the mall itself was bending, pulling me toward places I was never meant to go. It was on one of those nights that I made a mistake. I was patrolling near an old storage corridor that I'd barely noticed before. It was out of the way, hidden behind a row of kiosks no one visited, and the door looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I'd walked by it a dozen times without a second thought, until that night. As I got closer, I felt an odd chill, a sudden, unnatural draft. The air around that doorway was stale, thick with dust, carrying a faint scent of mildew and something else, something almost sweet. Against every instinct, I stepped inside, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. It was like entering a different world, a part of the mall that had been left behind, forgotten. The floor was covered in a thin layer of dust, like no one had been in there for years. My flashlight caught the faint outlines of shapes on the ground, scattered haphazardly across the floor. I knelt down to get a closer look and felt my heart sink. Toys, old broken toys. Stuffed animals with matted fur. A doll with one eye missing, the wheel of a toy car, all of them caked in dust, as if they'd been left here decades ago. It didn't make sense. There was no reason for these things to be here, no sign of a toy store that had closed, or a reason they would be abandoned in such a way. And that's when I heard a sound that shouldn't have been there, a faint childlike giggle echoing from deeper down the corridor. My heart pounded, and every instinct screamed at me to leave, but something kept me there, my feet glued to the spot. I aimed my flashlight toward the end of the corridor, expecting to see nothing, but then I saw a faint outline, a small shape barely visible, slipping out of sight around the corner. I don't know what I was thinking, but I followed. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe something else entirely, but I found myself moving toward that corner, as if in a trance. The whispers grew louder, mixed with faint footsteps, soft and rhythmic, leading me deeper into that forgotten part of the mall. As I turned the corner, the whispers stopped, the air going silent. And there, in the middle of the floor, was a small, dusty rocking horse. It was old, its paint chipped and faded, its wooden body cracked in places. It was just sitting there, perfectly still. But as I stepped closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Small footprints in the dust, leading away from the horse and disappearing into the darkness. I wanted to leave, to get as far from that place as possible. But as I turned, something moved. The rocking horse, silent until then, began to sway just a little, as if someone had brushed past it. And then I heard the giggle again, closer this time. I backed away, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. But as I did, the air grew colder, a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I could feel it then, the sense of something watching, something that had been waiting in that corridor for a long, long time. I practically stumbled back to the main hall, desperate to get back to the security office, to the light, to anything familiar. But the moment I stepped back into the open, I felt it, a rush of cold air, and then a shadow passed just behind me, moving so quickly I barely saw it. It felt like something had followed me out of that corridor, clinging to me. When I got back to the office, I was sure I was alone again. I told myself it was all in my head, that I'd imagined it, until I saw the rule. Rule 5. Do not enter the forgotten corridor near the east wing. I had never even noticed that rule before, buried beneath all the others. My stomach turned as I read it, realizing what I'd done. But the worst was yet to come. I hadn't even broken the final rule, the one rule that, even after everything I'd seen, I had dismissed as nonsense. The rule that I thought couldn't possibly matter. But that was the rule that changed everything. I came in the next night, my head still full of that forgotten corridor and the toys lying abandoned in the dust. I was determined to keep things normal, to follow every rule, and to stay far, far away from the places that didn't feel right. But that night, I discovered something that made everything worse. I realized I was alone in ways I hadn't even considered. I was going through the security tapes as usual, just routine checks, scanning through the hours of footage. But something caught my attention. There was nothing there. The tapes from the previous nights were blank. Entire shifts missing. Not a single recording of me walking the halls. No evidence that I had even been there. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe the cameras were faulty. But the more I looked, the more I realized that these tapes weren't just blank, they'd been erased. It was as if someone or something had removed any proof that I was ever here. I felt this heavy, sinking dread in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, somewhere, wanted me to disappear. I tried to ignore it, but the silence felt different that night, thicker somehow. I left the security office, telling myself I'd just do my rounds, keep my head down, and try not to think about the tapes. But as I walked through the mall, every step felt heavier. The shadows seemed darker, the air colder, and that's when I saw it. There was a figure, lingering near one of the storefronts. At first, I thought it was just a mannequin, maybe something that had been left out overnight. But as I got closer, the figure shifted, just slightly, like it was watching me, waiting. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I kept moving forward step by careful step. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, that I'd look away and it would be gone. But as I got closer, I realized I could smell something. It was this strong, foul odor, like something rotting, mixed with stale, stagnant air. The kind of smell that sticks in your throat, making you want to turn and run. I raised my flashlight and the beam fell over the figure, casting long shadows across the floor. For a split second, I saw it a shape that was almost human, but twisted, like it didn't quite belong. Its features blurred, like it was slipping in and out of focus. And then it was gone. 1 second there, the next, nothing. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it would burst. I backed away, scanning the area, but there was nothing. Just an empty storefront, the glass smudged with what looked like handprints, streaked and smeared, as if someone or something had pressed up against it, trying to get in or out. I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined it, that the stress and the isolation were just playing tricks on my mind. But the smell, that was real. It lingered, a sour, rotten stench that filled the air, clinging to me as I moved away. No matter where I went, it felt like it was following me, like a stain I couldn't shake. I kept moving faster now, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, following, lurking just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Every shadow felt darker, every corner more dangerous, as if the mall itself was coming alive, closing in on me. I tried to focus to finish my rounds, but the fear gnawed at me, a constant reminder that I was alone. And then I heard it, a faint rustling sound, coming from behind me, like something dragging across the floor. I froze, every nerve screaming, not daring to look back. I finally forced myself to turn to look, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hall, silent and still. But the smell was stronger now, filling the air like a warning. I took a step back, and that's when I saw it, a shadow, just at the edge of the light, slipping out of sight, as if it had been watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stumbled back to the security office, locking the door behind me, my hands shaking. I thought I was safe, that the walls would keep whatever it was out. But then I looked up at the monitors. One by one, the cameras started glitching, flickering with static. And then on one of the screens, I saw the figure moving slowly down the hallway, heading toward the security office. It moved with this deliberate, unnatural grace, as if it knew exactly where I was, as if it was coming for me. I backed away from the monitors, the sound of footsteps echoing through the speakers, louder and louder, until it felt like they were just outside the door. And then silence. No footsteps, no hum, just silence. I thought it was over, that whatever it was had left. But then, I heard it, a single knock on the door. Soft but deliberate, just like before. My heart stopped, my breath caught in my throat, and all I could do was stare at the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for whatever was on the other side to step through. After that night with the figure outside the door, I became paranoid, careful to avoid anything that felt off, and even more careful to follow the rules exactly. I'd never felt so alone. Every inch of that mall held secrets, and it felt like it was only a matter of time before they would close in around me. But no matter how careful I was, there was one rule that slipped through the cracks. Rule 7, do not look in the mirror in the West Wing after midnight. I'd avoided that part of the mall, staying as far from the mirrors as I could. But on this night, the lights had flickered, and I was forced to take a different route, one that led me right past those mirrors. As I walked past, my eyes caught on something, a movement, or maybe just my reflection. I glanced over, just for a second, to reassure myself that it was nothing. But the moment I looked, I knew I'd made a mistake. My reflection wasn't moving with me. It was standing there, staring back at me with this expression. Not a normal expression, not the one I was wearing. It was grinning, a slow, crooked smile that stretched wider and wider, like it was amused at my fear. I froze, staring at that face, my own face, smiling back at me with this twisted, malicious look. It wasn't just a reflection. It was something else, something alive. And as I watched, it raised its hand, slowly waving, as if to say goodbye. My heart was pounding, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I backed away, feeling my skin crawl, but the reflection just stepped forward, its grin growing wider, more unsettling. And then it turned, walking out of the mirror and into the mall, like it was finally free. I stood there, staring at the empty mirror, feeling a chill seep into my bones. My reflection, my own face, was gone. I knew I'd broken the last rule. I'd looked in the mirror after midnight, and now I was the one who was trapped. Panicking, I ran back to the security office, hoping to see myself on the cameras, hoping this was just another twisted trick. But as I scanned the screens, I saw it, my reflection, now walking the halls, moving through the mall like it belonged there, like it was alive. And I was trapped, forced to watch from the cameras, as if I was no longer real. It was like watching a stranger wearing my skin, moving through the place as if it had been waiting for this moment. I wanted to scream, to break the glass, to somehow shatter this nightmare, but I couldn't do anything. I was confined to that tiny office, watching as it explored the mall with that twisted grin. I tried everything to get out, banging on the door, calling for help, but it was no use. I was trapped, a prisoner in that tiny room, forced to watch my own face walk free. And then, as I watched, it stopped, turning to face the security camera, as if it could see me watching. Its eyes were darker than before, hollow and endless, and it smiled again, a smile that felt like it was peeling away everything I thought I was. It started doing things I'd never do, pausing in front of the closed storefronts, staring into the darkness as if it were looking for something hidden. It leaned close to the mannequins, almost whispering to them, pressing its hands against the glass. And every now and then, it would turn back to the camera, just to make sure I was watching. I felt this deep, crushing realization settle over me. I was no longer me. I was a ghost in my own life, forced to watch as something else took my place. as something else lived where I once did. It was a curse, a trap that I'd walked right into. And then it looked back at the camera, one final time, leaning in so close that its face filled the screen, its eyes empty and endless, filled with a quiet, mocking satisfaction. It raised its hand again, giving me that same slow wave as if to say goodbye, as if it was the real me, and I was the shadow. I don't know how long I sat in that room, watching myself or whatever had taken my place, walking freely through the halls. My thoughts spiraled, but it didn't take long for the realization to sink in. I was trapped, alone in a space that wasn't mine, watching my life continue without me. And maybe I wasn't the first. But then I noticed something. A small note half hidden under a pile of old papers on the desk. I don't know how I missed it before, but there it was, scrawled in hasty, almost frantic handwriting. Just a few words, but enough to chill me to the bone. We are not alone. We are them. The words made no sense, but the longer I stared at them, the more they felt right. Like a truth I'd known all along, hovering in the corners of my mind, waiting for me to see it. It was then that I began to understand. I wasn't just trapped. I was a part of something that had been going on far longer than I'd ever realized. I remembered the stories, the rumors I'd heard about guards who had gone missing, vanishing without a trace, never to be heard from again. I thought they were just rumors, but as I looked at that note, I knew they were real. They had been here, just like me, following the rules, trapped in this endless cycle. It was then that I heard it, a cacophony of sounds, filling the air, louder and closer, creaking like the walls themselves were alive, bending and twisting. Whispers all around me, too many to count, like dozens of voices overlapping, each one desperate, frightened. And footsteps, soft, shuffling footsteps, echoing from somewhere deep within the mall. I stumbled back from the monitors, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. It was like the walls were closing in, and I knew I couldn't stay there. I needed to get out, to escape. But as I turned to the door, I saw them, shadows moving toward me, dark figures slipping out from the corners, reaching for me, closing in. I bolted, throwing the door open and running into the hallway. But the sounds followed me, whispers growing louder, footsteps close behind, each one drawing nearer and nearer. The shadows were everywhere, twisting and writhing, reaching out from every corner, every darkened storefront, blocking every exit. My pulse raced, my breath short and shallow as I ran down the corridors, searching for any way out. But the walls seemed to stretch and shift, twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. It was like the mall itself was alive, a labyrinth designed to trap me, to keep me running in circles forever. Everywhere I looked, I saw their faces I'd never seen before but somehow recognized. Guards from the past, each one twisted and distorted, their expressions frozen in a mix of terror and despair. Their eyes were hollow, staring through me, as if they were pleading, begging for release. And then, I saw myself. My own face staring back at me, smiling with that same cold, twisted grin. I stopped, frozen, as my reflection took a step forward, blocking my path, its eyes dark and hollow. It tilted its head, watching me with an intensity that burned into my mind, like it was savoring the moment. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as my own face stared back at me. It felt like my soul was being pulled out, like I was being drawn into that empty, hollow shell, destined to take its place. And all around me, the shadows crept closer, their voices rising in a distorted chant, a chorus of despair. I tried to scream, to run, but I was rooted in place, held there by my own reflection. The shadows closed in, their fingers stretching toward me, their faces twisted in agony, each one a reflection of what I would become. And then, everything went silent. I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and heavy, pulling me back. And then, another and another. Each one colder than the last, gripping me, dragging me toward the darkness. I tried to fight, to scream, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the silence. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't just another guard. I was a part of the mall, trapped in its cycle, feeding its endless hunger. Each one of us, we were never alone. We were them, shadows trapped forever in this place, feeding its twisted reality. Everything around me had closed in the shadows, the voices, my own twisted reflection. I was trapped in this nightmare, every exit just leading me deeper into the dark. But in that final moment, a desperate thought hit me. I had to break the rules, all of them, one last time to make this end. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, but I knew what that meant now. I knew where I was, what I had become. And still I ran, my feet carrying me down hallways I barely recognized, passing dark storefronts and corridors that twisted in impossible ways. As I reached the front doors, I saw at the exit the last barrier between me and freedom. But something felt wrong, like the doors themselves were watching, waiting for me to make my move. And in the glass, I caught a glimpse of my reflection, distorted and monstrous. I didn't want to look, didn't want to face that thing, but my feet wouldn't stop. I took a step closer, and then another, my reflection growing darker, its features twisting further, becoming something almost inhuman. I knew I was breaking the last rule, willingly walking into the trap that had been waiting for me all along. But it didn't matter anymore. I had to see, I had to know. My own face stared back, but it wasn't me anymore. It was something dark, hollow, something that had been waiting to take my place. And then, just as I reached the doors, my reflection moved. It raised its hand, tapping on the glass, as if to get my attention, its fingers long and skeletal, its grin impossibly wide. I watched in horror as it lifted its other hand, pressing it against the glass, silently mouthing words I couldn't hear. Those eyes, they stared straight through me, piercing into my mind, filling me with the darkness I couldn't escape. I felt myself slipping, my own face starting to change, my features warping to mirror the creature on the other side. It was as if the glass was pulling me in, one last cruel twist binding me to the mall forever. In that last, terrible moment, I saw the truth I wasn't escaping. I was becoming a part of this place, trapped in this place just like the shadows, trapped in an endless cycle, feeding it with my fear, my life, my very soul. And then darkness. My vision faded, and all I could see was the endless, empty corridors stretching on forever, each one more twisted than the last, as if the mall itself was swallowing me whole. They said it was just a mall, but it's so much more. It's a place that holds on to you, feeds on you. You enter thinking you'll leave at dawn, but dawn never really comes here. It's just shadow after shadow, rule after rule, each one drawing you further in until you're part of it forever.
Thank you for joining me on this nightmarish journey through the shadows of the mall. If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss another spine-tingling tale. Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think happened next. And remember, some rules are meant to be followed, or perhaps some are better left broken.